I'm so pleased to introduce the very special panel that we have with us today to discuss the results of the incredibly successful recent auction hosted by Christie's, as well as the continuing philanthropic legacy of the Rockefeller family. So, to start, let me introduce our guests who will be speaking with us today. So first, at the end, we have David Rockefeller Jr. is a long-standing businessman and philanthropist. He has held many significant positions among Rockefeller-related entities, as well as in nonprofits that support the arts, education, and the environment. He is currently a trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the David Rockefeller Fund, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. A passionate supporter of the arts, Mr. Rockefeller has been a trustee of the Museum of Modern Art for nearly 4 decades, as well as on the Asian American Cultural Council. He served as citizen chair of the National Parks Foundation from 1995 to 2005. And in 2013, Mr. Rockefeller and 2 of his sisters established the Peggy McGrath Rockefeller Foundation, Stonehouse Grain, which manages 2,000 acres of farmland in Columbia County, New York, and promotes regenerative agriculture and supporting young farmers. Finally, Mr. Rockefeller's commitment to environmental preservation and his passion for sailing led him to found the nonprofit Sailors for the Sea in 2004, now joined with the global ocean conservation organization, Oceana. As director, Mr. Rockefeller promotes the organization's campaign-driven work to sailors worldwide. Next, Susan Rockefeller is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, artist, and conservationist. Her latest endeavor, Musings, is a digital magazine that creates ideas and innovations that pave the way for a more sustainable future. Susan interviews thought leaders in entrepreneurship, responsible innovation, and social impact to provide inspirational calls for action and solutions for positive change. A long-standing philanthropist, Susan sits on the boards of Oceana, Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture, We Are the Family Foundation, Southampton Arts Center, and Land and Garden Preserve. In her film work, Susan is a principal of Louverture Films and a member of the film committee of the Museum of Modern Art. Her own original films have aired on HBO, PBS, and the Discovery Channel. They include Food for Thought, Food for Life, Striking a Chord, Making Them Crooked Straight, Box Star Cafe, and Mission of the Mermaids. And then finally, we have Jonathan Rendell, the deputy chairman of Christie's Americas. Mr. Rendell drives senior business development and is a top-level client liaison in many areas of Christie's business. He was on the core team overseeing the collection of Yves Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger at Christie's Paris in 2009, which achieved a record-breaking $483.8 million in sales. Other notable collections with which Mr. Rendell was instrumental include the collection of Elizabeth Taylor at Christie's New York in 2011, and the sale of the collection of Roger Hatfield Ellsworth in 2014, which made $134 million, also record-breaking. Prior to joining Christie's, Mr. Rendell served as the head of the print department of Phillips, the London-based auctioneer. He has published and lectured widely. Most recently, Mr. Rendell is a key member of the senior management team that oversaw the sale of the Peggy and David Rockefeller collection, which achieved a record-breaking $832 million, the highest total ever for any single-owner collection at auction, and the most significant charitable auction in history, as well as the reason that we're here today. So, Jonathan, first, let's welcome our presenters. Yeah. And Jonathan, to get us started, I know this must have been a pretty incredible auction week with one historic sale after another. Can you talk a bit about the auction, its goals, and its results?
Yeah, absolutely. Less an auction week, more an auction year. We had an extraordinary privilege in working with Mr. Rockefeller's family to put this sale together over a period of time, which made a huge difference to the way we approached it. I think for Christie's internally, this was incredibly important as the sale that really pushed us forward on the digital platforms, on many other different ways of marketing the things. But what was also incredibly interesting and important for us was the philanthropic aspect of this. This is the biggest charity sale that's ever been held. And I think we all felt a huge responsibility whilst going through the motions of putting a sale together. We've all done great big sales. But this was completely different in that it wasn't to profit an individual. This was to profit a whole series of philanthropies, which I think is an incredibly important way forward for a lot of our collectors. We've already started talking to quite a lot of other people about how they can adapt the Rockefeller pattern to what they want to do with their collections going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the clicker doesn't seem to be working. If you could advance slides.
I think what might be interesting for everybody is just to see a short video that we've been working on that sums up the sale. And then let's get into the more interesting bit, which is us grilling them.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
There's some lamb.
Oh, yeah, good.
Great luminous Odalis, 71,500,000. Yours it is. Mononythias showing here, 75 million, ladies and gentlemen. So you have it. Sold to you. The great Picasso at $100 million. $102 million. Louis, do you have it?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Marley Rouge, $1,500,000. Well done.
The Diego Rivera, The Rivals, selling for $8,400,000. The O'Keefe, Denier Abiquiu, $7,200,000. For you, sir. The Gilbert Stuart, Portrait of George Washington, $7,700,000. And selling at Christie's for $10 million. Sold here.
The beautiful Whistling Swan, $280,000. Sold.
And we go to Delacroix.
Comes the first really important question. What would they have thought? What would Peggy and David have thought of this great hoopla that ended up with this extraordinary result?
Well, I've wondered that myself. My mother, who died more than 20 years ago, and my dad, who just died last year, they shared many things. They were both very competitive, so they would have loved the fact that this was the best in many categories. They would have loved that. It also would have been, I think, Jonathan, a testament to their taste, which I always thought was very good. It wasn't always my taste, but it was a wonderful taste in the things that they bought, so they would have loved that. And then they would have been so pleased that the institutions, 12 of them at least, that they cared about, received so much money, in some cases twice as much as they really expected. So, anyway, that was absolutely wonderful. And I think it's on to the next question.
It is indeed.
And that's, you're talking about those foundations that will be receiving the benefits of this auction, and I know that perhaps the greatest Rockefeller legacy is the family's commitment to philanthropy, which runs throughout the generations. So can you talk more a bit about your family's unique approach to giving kind of over time?
Well, both Sue and I come from philanthropic families, but let me start, if I could, and in terms of my parents' philosophy and the impact of this sale, I think what's maybe most important is their recognition that endowment is a critical element in the nonprofit sector. having funds that are actually releasing income every year, because earned income and contributed income is very hard to come by. So they were so focused on endowments, and a very good example of the power of that is the Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture in Westchester County. Susan actually sits on the board and can talk a little bit about the content of that, but endowment was very key to them. Yeah. Would you like to say a moment?
Sure, I could say, I mean, what's great about endowment is that the institutions can get on with either the research or the experimentation and not worry about extensive fundraising. So with the case of Stone Barns, we now have unbelievable opportunity to continue the work in resilient agriculture and research in what we're calling slow tools, because there's this resurgence of small-scale farming, and there's not a lot of tools and technology that actually is working for the small-scale farmers. So it just, it's this big sigh of relief. We can go into the board meeting and actually think about how we can create, more immersive experiences, more educational outreach from K to 12 to educating next generation farmers. So it's just unbelievable that there's that sense of freedom that comes from building an endowment like that.
Absolutely. And I feel like this speaks a lot to the idea of patient capital, which is, I know, something that your family believes in as well. The idea of open-ended giving. You could speak a bit to that. I know Stone Barns is one example.
Yeah, I mean, I think patient capital relates to not expecting instant results, as in often in business, and particularly in research-oriented businesses, it takes a long time for something to germinate. And that's the same in much of the nonprofit world. So not only having the capital, but being patient with it, I think it's extremely important. My parents also really believed in the importance of leadership, or really three things together. Passion for whatever it was, that's the kernel, that's the key first step. And then leadership, your own leadership, hopefully, to guide the institution, and money. But the three together. Philanthropy not just being about the money.
And then in terms of patient capital, just an example that there's a saying that if you aren't thinking big enough, if you can solve the problem that you're looking at in your lifetime. So, whether it's, some of the philanthropy that my family has done with the Wilderness Society and working to preserve millions of acres of wilderness in the United States, or working on peace in the Middle East with an institute at Tel Aviv University on the history and philosophy of science and ideas, patient capital is really that long-term view, and it's not something that happens quickly. It's not a quick fix. And a great example is the Peking Union Medical College, that it was one of the oldest philanthropic gifts that you can see, yeah. And the work is still sowing incredible rewards in our travels to Asia now.
Something that has truly passed down throughout the generations.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to sound impatient, but what do you see as the immediate result, as opposed to the capital, the long-term capital thing is fantastic and incredibly important. What will be the immediate result of the sale? I'm constantly thinking about what happens after the sale. How do we move on to the next thing?
Yes, yeah.
So is there an immediate result?
Yeah, I mean, there were 12 different institutions, and so you can imagine that when a significant number of dollars comes to a Harvard University, they already have a significant number of dollars. My father was interested in two particular things, and so they'll get guided in those directions. One was urging all students during their college years to become familiar with a culture not their own, hopefully a nation not their own, and so to travel. And he provided funds for that. And then the other, related but slightly different, was support of the what's called the DR Center for Latin American Studies. his great interest in the continent south of North America and the Latin cultures. And so the result will be that Harvard will be pushed to be more global and more hemispherically inclusive.
And Sue, with your real interest in the environment and the future of the environment, how will it impact the immediate needs of a world which is constantly challenged?
Well, I would say that one of the most exciting collaborative partnerships that we're involved with is the Peggy McGrath Rockefeller Foundation and the 2,000 acres of regenerative agriculture in the Hudson Valley. So with that influx of more funds, there'll be more opportunities to really innovate. We're working with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, looking at how the carbon sequestration is happening with the application of cover cropping on our fields. So there's a research component, and when you're experimenting and innovating for change, it costs money. And to not have to seek funding, but actually have it there so that we can start sharing our findings and actually find other people. There's a lot of interesting work going on in California in regenerative agriculture, and we have the ability to actually do this research and not be constrained by the constant fundraising cycle. So to me, that's super exciting. And then I sit on the board of the Land and Garden Preserve in Maine, and we have 3 gardens, and it really is looking at the intersection of man-made design and the beauty of horticulture with the natural beauty of Acadia National Park. So that too will be endowed so that we can bring more visitors. There's something like 3 million visitors that come to Acadia National Park, and to be able to leverage that with the educational component of what does it mean to garden and create beauty in a natural landscape.
And to charge less.
And to charge less.
To the public.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the most significant things I think that we at Christie's came to learn during this whole process was the intertwining of Rockefeller philanthropy and social history in America and elsewhere. I mean, obviously, we talked briefly about the Peking Medical College and the importance of that. But if you could talk just briefly about historically the family's involvement, not just your parents, which your parents is enormous, but there's a whole thing behind them, which I think is very important for people to understand, this very long-term view of how you make things better.
Exactly right. So it is often said that the Carnegies and the Rockefeller families were the ones who, in a sense, invented modern philanthropy. What does that mean, modern philanthropy? Well, I think what it meant was sometimes what's called scientific philanthropy. And charity was being moved to give funds to the immediately needy, whom you could perhaps see on the street. A wonderful human gesture. Scientific philanthropy is to try to figure out why there are so many people on the streets in the first place and create a more systemic answer to that problem. When we were seeing the slide of the Peking Union Medical College in Beijing, which was founded about 105 years ago by the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the first scientific philanthropies, you were seeing not just a response to sick Chinese people on the street, although that may have been an emotional cause for the founding, but you were also seeing a response to the fact that at that time medical practices in China were very rudimentary. And so this was the first modern hospital in China. And I'm so proud that it still exists today. Susan and I have visited it several times. So, it's a kind of a thoughtfulness that obviously companies like Google need to be thoughtful about what will business success mean next decade. You can't sit on your laurels. And philanthropy is really the same.
And over the past year, I'm not looking for praise, but over the past year, though if you want to offer some, I wouldn't mind. No, over the last year, while we've gone on this journey together, we've changed as a company. Christie's has changed the company. It's changed the way that we think about what we do. How has it changed things for the two of you? What have you learned? How do you feel about this extraordinary gesture? I mean, the amount of money involved is staggering. For that all to go at once to the philanthropies your parents cared for is mind-boggling.
It is.
You want to start?
Yeah, well, what I hope, and it's something that you mentioned earlier, is that other people with significant collections will start to think about where they can take an auction, where those proceeds can go, and also benefit institutions that could use more financial support. So if this becomes a trend, that there's more people that will give, and there's been a history. There was a Yves Klein that went to Oceana, the proceeds that Louis Gouzert facilitated, and it was $1 million painting, and Oceana got the benefit to that. So finding people that have, when you can marry your passion with art and philanthropy, and then choosing a few paintings. It doesn't have to be your whole collection. It's extraordinary that the Rockefellers had their whole collection go to philanthropy, but at least to me, that's one of the most exciting trends, if it does happen, that there'll be more people thinking in terms of, I have this painting I bought for $10,000. It's now $150,000. Give it to an institution or your alma mater, and think about broader ways of making impact.
It's like giving a low basis stock when the value increases and you get the benefit of the deduction for the current value, not just the lower value. I have a very different answer, Jonathan. It has to do with you. And that is to say that when you've grown up living with something in an environment in which, as in my case, the houses my parents had were full of all sorts of objects. They were very big on tchotchkes, especially porcelain tchotchkes. And
also known as incredibly valuable pieces of...
which is
valuable
what I learned from
Exactly.
Jonathan, that it wasn't just odd little tchotchkes, but that they had a value that was both monetary, but maybe much more importantly, aesthetic. And so by actually, when Christie's set them aside in cases or hung them on a wall all by themselves, I really saw these pieces in a very different way. And so that was a great gift, Jonathan. Thank you for leading the way on that. And I think it says something about context and the way that we see, I look out here, it's hard to see people, but it's an agglomeration of faces I can't quite see, but each one of your faces is very distinct. Each one of your personalities very distinct. That was true about the collection too, so I really learned about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, always with a collection, it's a biography in objects.
Yeah.
I get to know people incredibly well, usually after they're no longer with us, because I know what they liked.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
And I would just say that, we spent, years looking at all this art that was, there was beautiful, curtains, and you couldn't really separate it. It was just all part of the decoration of the house. And I thought that Christie's did such an outstanding job on lighting everything and being able to really take that moment. And the other thought is that, Christie's is about, we're both conservationists, and it is the best reuse of the most beautiful objects that your family enjoyed, and now it's gone on to either private collections or private collectors or museums, and the value of that beauty is timeless.
And another extraordinary aspect, of course, is not just you, the two of you, who we've been talking to a lot during this process. It's your siblings. It's the next generation of the Rockefellers. There is this DNA that you have of philanthropy, which sets you somewhat apart from other people. But I know that you are both very strongly personally involved in philanthropies that aren't necessarily the ones that
Right.
were the ones favoured by your parents. And I wondered if you could talk for a little while about what your interests are and how you differ from them in your interests.
Well, that's good. I have a very close relationship to a Unitarian church called All Souls on the Upper East Side, and I love it because of their commitment to beautiful words, including poetry and great sermons, and beautiful music. We have an amazing choir and a resident chamber quartet, and a fantastic community program, 2 nights a week feeding 250 individuals who live not far away but don't have regular meals, and that's such a wonderful thing, and it really binds us to that community and that church. It's very personal. We're donors. We're active with the church, and so that's a very different thing from being on the board of the Museum of Modern Art, which I've also been, as Emma mentioned, for nearly 40 years. And that's such a large institution, such a large board. We've just enlarged the board to 70 people, whereas the church is really about something much more immediate. And both are wonderful, and very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have this wonderful community connection to We Are Family, among other things.
Yeah,
so different.
Yeah, so we do a lot together as a couple, but I also sit on the board of We Are Family Foundation, which is, I don't know if people here know Nile Rodgers, who wrote the song We Are Family and Let's Dance. He's an amazing musician and composer, and I made a film with him ways back called Striking a Chord on our troops and PTSD and using music as a way to help with the healing process. And this is a very small foundation. There's about 12 of us on the board, and it's about training and mentoring next generation leaders. So if you know anybody in their teenage, early 20s that are looking for great mentors, we bring people together from around the world for 1 week of intensive training. And, we would love to see that next generation, and they are, really addressing and taking on these challenges. And every time I go to this board meeting and I meet these young people, I am so excited because they are innovating on the environment and with bullying, with internet innovations, and it's remarkable. So I think that's something that your parents wouldn't necessarily have supported, but it is global in its network of youth.
And joint ventures, which you do together?
Well, I think the principal one now is really about ocean conservation. A lot of ocean news these days. Didn't used to be so, but whether it's sea level rise,
Plastic
acidification, plastic pollution, decline in fishing or fisheries and fish, the oceans are under stress. So it was mentioned earlier about my Sailors for the Sea effort, a smaller entity that lives in Newport, Rhode Island. That's just been merged up into the larger Oceana, where Sue already was on the board. Now both of us are on the board, and it's a fantastic global campaign organization to protect the oceans. But you should say more. You've been on for a longer time than I have.
Yeah, it's the biggest NGO solely focused on ocean protection, and we invite all of you to become wave makers. Anyone can sign on, and
no cost.
No cost, and you'll learn all about what's happening with the oceans. And they're just making a difference. They're saving the oceans. We have a campaign to save the oceans and feed the world. We're working on plastic pollution. We go country by country, and it's really just, what we find is 71%, as you know, of our Earth is ocean, and over 1 billion people rely on fish for their major source of protein. So we want to keep the oceans healthy and keep the levels of fish abundant so that we don't have to cut down more trees and have more cattle. The whole idea is that from a climate change standpoint, we really want to keep our oceans abundant. So we love working together on Oceana.
Including fundraising, and
yeah.
Christie's was several times the host of a fundraiser, both for Sailors for the Sea
and Oceana.
for Oceana, and there'll be another fundraiser in New York this fall, and Sue is the chair of that effort. So, as a board member, you give what you can, either in time or talent or treasure, as they say. And one of your responsibilities is to help fundraise, and Sue's a very good one, so watch out.
I'll send you all invites.
Fabulous. So I know just talking about the ocean efforts that you're related to, given that we are here at Google,
Yeah.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the ways that technology in particular can aid in philanthropic giving. Can you talk to some of the projects that have a technological bent that you've been involved with?
So one that actually has Google at its source is something called Global Fishing Watch. So here we go, there's the slide. So Global Fishing Watch was basically created with Oceana, SkyTruth, and Google, and primarily funded through the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. He was one of the lead transformational funders for this, so we are very grateful to him. And what it does is it allows, in almost real time, surveillance of global fishing vessels so that you can help with, and anyone, NGOs, governments, activists can look and see if vessels are in illegal waters, so that it will help with transparency, with IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. So it is just a game changer, and our goal is to really bring it to global scale. So I think technology plays a huge role in the surveillance aspect, especially if you don't have funding for enforcement on the ocean.
You can't really have a police force
in the
entire ocean, which covers more than 70% of the globe. And so this is a way, instead of having a vast set of police boats out there, that you have this surveillance. So if a ship, and mainly we're focused on large fishing
industrial
boats,
fishing vessels, is
either in an area it shouldn't be, as in a marine protected area, or taking stocks that it's not licensed to take, the surveillance catches them, and they can be punished, which is, until recently they really couldn't be. So thanks to
thank you, Google.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And do you see, I know the additional funds will obviously help support this technology, but can you also see kind of more of the funds that have been raised even expanding this technology or allowing technology to play a larger role in some of your other philanthropic efforts?
Well, it's a good question, and as many of you know, some of that same GPS technology is being applied to agriculture. And so when fertilizing machines or seeding machines are going over a piece of terrain, there's information about the chemistry of the soil that they're passing over, the fertility of it. And so in real time, with this technology, a single driver could be passing over, and the field has been mapped as to what needs more of one chemical, what part of the field needs more of one chemical than another. And so you don't just apply the same coating of everything everywhere, but it's really customized. I mean, that never happened before. And so it's a wonderful way in which technology is helping the production of food. In fact, you might say that both of these technological examples are ultimately about healthy food for us humans.
And it's called precision agriculture, so you can pinpoint what parts of the field need either more water, more nitrogen, more, if you're doing regenerative, it would be manure teas or, inputs, but you're not adding so much input that, so it's game changing really as wonderful. Well. So.
Absolutely, and it's so exciting to think of how much more we can enable as technology gets better and as the philanthropic work continues. So I know we've talked a lot about kind of the momentous scale of the auction. I think that's one of the things that has obviously generated so much buzz and attention, but I think there's also a lot that I would hope to learn, that I hope what others would learn on a much more individual, kind of even everyday basis. And you both are so experienced in philanthropy on various scales. So could you give maybe any practical advice or tips for people who are looking at this, who are reading the news and wanting to get more involved in philanthropy in whatever ways they're able?
Want to start?
Sure. Well, first of all, just, both of us really believe, and I'm sure all of you, that passion is key. So if you're working a day job and it's not your passion, hopefully it is, but you want to find something that you are passionate about, because that's going to keep you going. And a lot of the issues and the challenges that face us are not easy to solve. So you want to have that tenaciousness and stick-to-itiveness to really stay with an organization and take that long-term view. So once you identify what the passion is, it's just researching the options. There's a lot of groups involved in, ocean conservation, land preservation, education, whatever it is, hunger, immigration issues, voter rights. I mean, there's so many. And to just do your homework and find out, who the leadership is. I really believe that, finding those leaders that are really at the forefront of being efficient and effective and charismatic are the ones, at least for me, that I get attracted to. But I would say, the passion, the research, and then engage in whatever way, whether it's your time, volunteering, donating. Obviously, many of these organizations need social media and some of the skills that all of you have here. So it's just finding your way and seeing what's the best. But I really do think so much of philanthropy comes from it's the root of it is love of mankind or humankind, and I think it's finding what it is that you truly want to engage with and connect with, and following that path. Because I really do believe. I'll give you an example. I was passionate about Alaska and also passionate about gardening. In my early 20s, I went up to Alaska. I still love Alaska. I was involved with a foundation there. 20 years later, I ended up meeting David because we both had a passion for Alaska and ended up making a film together. So I think if you follow your passion, it takes you on a path that is, quite remarkable. And just to have faith in that passion and to see where it takes you.
Wow. David, do you have anything to add from that, from maybe your experience of the charities that you've worked with?
Yeah, no, I think that's a wonderful answer that Sue gave. No, I don't think that I do. I think so many people feel that philanthropy is about big dollars. And big dollars are great, and if you have them, wonderful. But it really is also about impulse and research and serious purpose of giving. So I think that was a great answer. Thank you, Sue.
And I could say one thing about social impact investing. There are many interesting hybrids happening now with social impact investing, and I can talk to one. I'm an advisor to a nonprofit called Food System 6, which is based out of California, and they have a nonprofit arm where they identify entrepreneurs that are looking for food system change. So it could be anything from cricket farming to pasture map, renewal mills looking at food waste. And they mentor them and give them the business skills to then meet with venture capitalists. And they come together, and it's been an unbelievable success of marrying both that nonprofit incubator approach of mentorship with the venture side. So I think you're going to see more of those. And I think it's very exciting because I know that's part of what the next generation is very interested in. Not just the NGO, but how can they actually take their dollars and put it to work in a philanthropic way, but also an entrepreneurial way as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I know we do have time for questions, and there are mics on either end, so I'd love to invite the audience members to start coming up to ask questions. But before that, I did have just one bit more fun of a question to ask as people are coming up. I was fortunate enough to be able to see the collection as well before it went to auction. And like everyone else, was completely blown away by all of the different pieces and the incredible job that Christie's did with presenting it and really showcasing it. So I would love to hear from each of you. What was one piece that you particularly, not a favorite, but maybe something that had more meaning to you, or something that you particularly were drawn to?
Gosh, there were so many. There was a beautiful desk, and Jonathan can describe it in greater detail certainly than I can, and it sat in what was called the morning room. I think it was where the light was good in the morning in my parents' New York brownstone. And my mother, who was a great letter writer, would write letters every morning, and she had quite a few letters to write, people to thank, people to probably solicit funds from, etc. And she would go to this beautiful desk and write every morning. So if I got up as early as she did some morning, I'd find her down there with her cup of coffee and her pad of personal stationery and writing letters. And that desk, and you know which one I mean, Jonathan, went for more than 10 times, I think, what was expected.
Which was great for you, and also I think it's part of the interest that the family actually had for everybody, that this was extraordinary moment, not just for the Rockefeller family, but for everybody else, and what Rockefeller represented. You know, the national parks, all of the things that we learnt about and tried to push out there. All the things that the Rockefellers have done, it meant something really serious to someone to go and spend that much money on a desk.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
She also taught you to write very good letters. I'd like to just throw that out there.
She's a great writer. I would say for me the decoys were really, really exceptional, and we collect decoys, but to see the way that Christie's placed them was just spectacular. And it really spoke, I thought, to that blend of sculpture and observation. We're bird watchers, so we go out and wherever we travel, we look at birds. And so we both have a particular interest in sort of the sculptural aspects of the decoys and the care and the carving and the details. So I just loved how Christie's put that together, that whole room. And I think you said there were a lot of people, surprisingly, that were very interested in the decoys.
Who stayed up until 2 a.m. to actually buy duck decoys, who knew that there would be such an interested group of new enthusiasts.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll start over here with questions then.
Hi, I'm Tina Daniels. I work in the LCS agency team. Thank you so much for this presentation and also for your service to the world. I have a question about the preparation and planning that you maybe gave to the agencies and nonprofits that received the money. But if I could ask a two-part question, the last conversation just sort of made me think, I wonder, was there any sentimentality in this experience that sort of made you sad to give up some of these family heirlooms or works? And I'm presuming it was never much of a decision to do this, or was it? And do you miss some of the art?
Well, it's a fair question, and I think each member of the family would answer it differently, but I'll answer it my way, which is that what I miss is really the gestalt, the entire feeling of being in the 3 houses that principally held the art. Not so much about individual objects, but, you know, as a child you grow up and you have a feeling about the place that you grow up in, your own room, or the warmth of the kitchen in the morning, or whatever it is. So it's not being able to go back to those places that I miss. And luckily, some of the wonderful pieces, not the ones that went through the auction, have gone to museums. And so I have visitation rights at MoMA and the National Gallery and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and some other places that have wonderful pieces, and I will visit them.
Yeah. So I'm most curious about how you helped prepare these nonprofits to receive the money that they received. And I think about my own experience chairing a small nonprofit in New York, and I can imagine we would be absolutely thrilled to receive a substantial amount of money, but also somewhat paralyzed by it. And how did you work with them to ensure that they were prepared to receive the money and it would be spent in accordance with what you wanted?
No, it's a good question, and so my father was a very orderly person, and both of my parents were also very loyal to the institution. So these weren't sudden connections to the 12 charities. It was also true that, my father's will was public, and the 12 were named in the will. He died in March of last year. So between the publication of the will and the receipt of dollars, each institution knew what number was written down for them, so they could begin to prepare. And you're absolutely right. As wonderful as it is to receive new money, are you prepared to invest it? Have you got an idea of how to use if it's going to be endowment, the income? Does that mean you're going to hire more people? And it won't really probably be until later this year that all of the funds will be received. So there's a little digestion time. But it's a very good question. And these institutions, now that they're beginning to learn that they may be having even more than what was in the will coming to them, thanks to the great success of the auction, they may be scrambling a bit to, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, first of all, Susan and David, thank you so much for all the work you have done. And I really appreciate you taking a long-term view in supporting the charities. And I actually have two questions. So the first question is for Jonathan. And so you has mentioned the auction has changed how Christie's does the work as well. Can you elaborate on that, like exactly what changes have happened since the auction? And then my second question is, what do you think like governments and big corporations like Google can do more in supporting philanthropy?
I think for Christie's, what was really interesting was to talk with my colleagues about how this was different from every other big sale we'd done. There have been other sales which have got large charitable contributions coming from them. In this particular case, it was the entire thing. And corporately, we felt different in that there was a real responsibility that came with the privilege of having the sale, which was we had to make this money. The money had already been organized by Mr. and Mrs. Rockefeller, and we knew we were going to be okay. I mean, when you get a sale like this, you can taste it almost immediately that it's going to be a success. There's a buzz that begins to build, and it may begin with 6 of us sitting in an office talking about it, and then the whole company took hold of what was going on and became proud. And there were people who were willing to stay till 2 a.m. to do phone bidding with clients and feel proud that they were part of this great corporate effort. The pressure was on us to see how much more we could raise than the required funds. How much was what we were doing individually contributing to raising yet more, an additional almost $200 million that will go to the charities, that will go to the philanthropies. So that, no pressure, makes a difference when you're giving, in my case, the 50th guided tour of the week, walking people through the collection. You have to stay enthusiastic. You have to stay on top of things. My colleagues who were producing Instagram posts every day, and trying to make it interesting and attractive. And it was all about how are we going to make this even better than we know it's going to be? How are we going to, as a company, get together? And there's also a great unifying thing. When a company is working on something like this, everybody feels involved. In our case, from the maintenance staff right the way through to the chairman's office, I mean, everybody in the company felt that they had a role to play. And we made sure that everybody had a role to play. And I think corporately that made a huge difference.
You want to start on the other part of the question, which I think was about government and corporate philanthropy. You know, let's just take in the U.S. at the moment, the belief system of the current administration in Washington is so different from previous belief systems. What that means is that, because we're in the field of environment, there's going to be more emphasis on corporate and philanthropic help for environmental causes. So that scene is really shifted, and it puts a lot of pressure on philanthropies and corporate philanthropy as well to pick up part of the burden that used to be in the government's pocket. So that's a very important switch.
You know, I would just say that, you know, I hear about people getting their interviews for Google and that everybody wants to work here, right? So the intelligence, the IQ factor is, you know, top level. And there's so much opportunity for the employees here to make a difference. So, you know, we were thrilled, Oceana was thrilled that Google partnered with us to come up with this innovative surveillance system to really, you know, make sure that we could curb illegal fishing. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for Google to get involved using their technological know-how and their reach. And I would leave it up to the ingenuity and creativity of the people here. And I don't know exactly what kind of CSR or philanthropic arms you have in place to really mobilize some of your employees to do programs or get involved in certain initiatives or activations. But I think, you know, just having that conversation and seeing where you can go. And I know you have Google X and you have a lot of really interesting funding vehicles, especially in food. I know in California, because I'm hearing about that through Food System 6. So I think harnessing the technological know-how and capacity of what you can do here and addressing some of these global problems that in agriculture, with climate change, it would be wonderful if you could sort of streamline those efforts.
Great, and I think we have time for one more question, maybe two if we make it fast. So,
You're up first if you want to.
Sure, I just have a quick question. My name is Matt, a longtime New Yorker, so I've always grown up appreciating everything you've done for the community in New York. Actually, a question about art. You know, you hear and read more and more today, and I'm sure you guys see it, that you know, art is now being touted as an investment vehicle more so than ever previously before. And I'm curious as to what you guys think and see, and you know, when the circles that you guys run in terms of, you know, is this a positive or negative effect in the art world where folks are now looking at art as something that can appreciate rather than just the ability to appreciate art? And what's this going to do to art, you know, in the long term?
Big one. Well,
yes,
there are pluses and minuses, I would say. I mean, for me, the most important thing about art is its ability to move us, to impel us to greater heights, to help us look into the human condition, all the wonderful things that art does. And I'm talking about not only visual arts, but all the arts. On the other hand, as art in the visual field has gotten so expensive, it puts it out of reach of a lot of people, can only have so much in museums. And I think it for some people does make art a commodity instead of a great human expression. So I think that, you know, it's wonderful for the artists who are selling their art at great prices and dispiriting for those who don't. There's so many things in our culture where the split between the highest and the lowest is so great, and art now has become one of those areas, professional sports, corporate executives, whatever. So it's another example of that, and that part of the equation, Christie's benefits from, our auction benefited us from, but there is is that piece of art 1 million times better than that piece of art just because the price says so? Not necessarily.
I think individual ownership is not necessarily the way in which you should judge a work of art.
Hear, hear.
That some people like to own very expensive objects, and there will always be those people. Thank God, because that pays my bills. But it's equally possible to get that feeling of elevation that a great work of art conveys to you by going to see it in a museum, by looking at a great piece of architecture, by listening to music. I mean, there are so many different ways that are not to do with the capitalization of the object. So I think I live in a very rarefied world in which people spend a lot of money on objects. Do I identify myself in that world? No, not necessarily. I'm equally happy going to a museum and looking at an object. And I too have visitation rights on some of the things I've sold in the past at museums, and that's a huge satisfaction because you've put something in a public arena. So I think that the art market is not necessarily related to the true art world.
And I just say that you can go to museums. No, I thought that was very good. But also, I think it's great just to go to galleries, go to the Lower East Side, go to Brooklyn, go look and train your eye. And if you like something, I mean, there's a lot of art. This is about emerging art. And you could make a small contribution to someone's, art career that can totally change their lives. And I agree with you that some art has this crazy price tag to it, and then there's other artists that are unbelievably talented. They will never, well, maybe, doubtful that many of them will ever get to the heights of some of those that were auctioned off, but that doesn't mean that they're unbelievably talented and that you can enjoy looking at the pieces. So I'm one for really looking at emerging arts, and we support arts whenever we travel. We will buy something, and it can be ceramic, it could be a carving, it could be something that's been repurposed from Coca-Cola cans, sort of upcycled art. And then those become some of the memories of our lives. And if they end up having value, great. But we love living with them. So
it's nice.
It's wonderful. And then really quickly, yes.
My question's on, sorry.
All right. Well, that's a pretty fabulous note to end on. Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Thanks for being here.
Well, then, thank you so much for being here, and thank you